What is cannabis doing for you?
Put some dog tags together, man.
All right, guys. Hey, welcome back to PV Unfiltered. Yes, we are, Bryan. We are still the #1 cannabis podcast in the nation. And you always know it's going to be good when I have this guy sitting to the right of me, not the left of me. And so this is kind of going to be a very interesting and fun one with the times and things that are happening right now. We have former Air Force Michael Krawitz.
That's correct.
And Bryan has a lot more, what would you call it? More time with Michael and understanding what the amazing things that he has done and continues to do from Virginia, where it's nice and warm today, right, Michael?
Not too bad.
Only inside the house.
Yep.
So listen, thanks for coming on, and especially right now, because I think there's a lot of things that need to be kind of understood and the direction that we're going, and I think you have some history and some insight, and Bryan, this is definitely right up his alley as far as everything that is going on. But can I get just like, where'd you come from? Get some background.
Sure. So yeah, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me on. Mike Krawitz is my name, and I grew up in a little town called Fair Lawn, New Jersey, which was a little white picket fence little town that probably would be, your typical little suburban town, and have a typical suburban town story, except that it was like within bicycle riding distance of the George Washington Bridge and New York City. So I grew up, in a kind of a 1970s cannabis movie, you might want to say, from your perspective today. And I actually went into the military. I got injured, which threw me off of my track. I had a really cool track I was working on to become a helicopter pilot. I was an electronic warfare systems technician in the Air Force, but I got derailed and hurt and started retraining. And while I was retraining, I started working on activism, and activism wound up continuing, whereas my retraining sort of failed. That's sort of my history. But yeah, I grew up right there in sort of storybook USA.
So did you get injured during training?
No, I was actually in Guam, USA. And I was on my last Friday night on Guam. I was getting ready to embark on this really incredible whirlwind trip that I'd set up months in advance to move my port of call out of Guam into Tokyo and set up official travel duty papers to move to Korea and Thailand and all these cool places. And if you know about military travel, you would get bumped by a general suitcase, but if you have travel orders, then you get the planes that you want. So it took a lot of months in advance, but I had this really cool trip planned, and I went out to celebrate on Friday night with my buddy. Had a nice dinner down at the Hilton down on the beach in Guam, downtown, and talked him into letting me ride his brand new bike home. New Virago motorcycle, beautiful bike. And because I was on this brand new bike, and because, he was behind me on mine, and I thought I'd take it real easy, that was my undoing. And driving really slow in the right-hand lane, I would have been doing fine, doing fast in the fast lane, but the right-hand lane terminated. It was a right turn lane with no markings of any kind. And I just, split second, there goes, your life trajectory, and it changed completely. Took many, many years to unfold, but looking back, it's quite obviously a different life path than I would have had I not hit that end of the road.
Everything happens for a reason. I'm a big believer in that.
I hope so. I hope, it's all for a better purpose. I've tried to make, what do they say? Make lemons into lemonade or whatever.
Yeah.
Seems to work. So is that what got you moving into like the kind of the cannabis world, or what was kind of the path you took to get to there?
I have to say, you know, be honest, that cannabis is sort of a fluid line that goes through my life. I mean, I was there, a kid, 13 years old, whatever, you know, right there in the movie theater watching Cheech and Chong Up in Smoke for the first time. and that, you know, in the movie theater in the 70s when Cheech and Chong Up in Smoke came out, just so you know, you still had a smoking section back then. And the entire smoking section of the theater immediately lit up with marijuana cigarettes. And then but this is the funniest part is yet to come, which is that about 5 minutes later, the whole theater lit up. And it was just passing joints from left to right. You know,
one giant section.
Yeah, that was New Jersey, you know, watching Up in Smoke for the first time and where I grew up. So yeah, I've always thought cannabis was really, I don't know, the people, the culture, the plant itself, it was beautiful, just beautiful in every respect. And I that's been something that's sort of been there all along. Even as I pushed it away, really, I mean, in a way, to go into the military and, you know, join up and sign up and, you know, do the things that I did and go to the places I went. I didn't expect to have any connection to cannabis, but they threw me in the middle of the South Pacific and then threw me in an Army hospital. And check this out, right? In the Army hospital that I was recuperating in, and it's called Tripler Army Medical Center on the hill there in Honolulu, Hawaii. And on the wall, I imagine the mural is still there. There's a mural with a fellow sitting underneath a palm tree with a guitar in his hand. He's half asleep, and in front of him is a jar with cigarettes in it, and on the front of the jar it said Pakalolo, which is of course cannabis, local jargon. And that's literally painted in a mural on the wall inside the ward that I was recuperating in the hospital in Hawaii. So, you know, no matter where I would go, I've never really gotten away from cannabis. I can't say that I ever have. But I tell you, when I got back into it was very serendipitous, and it was just because of the fact that big trip that I had planned, that I was going to go all across Asia, I couldn't afford it when I got out. I was going to do it. I was going to repeat it, you know, on my own dime, and I just couldn't afford it, but I could afford Europe. And I wound up doing like a camping trip across Europe, 3 months. And there is when I really found medical cannabis. And I didn't even know. I knew what we were doing in the USA. You know, of course, I'd worked on some of the letter writing campaigns around the Proposition 215, you know, that we had in 1996. But I didn't know that they had a sort of a mirror campaign and medical cannabis that was quietly being implemented at the national level in Holland, in the Netherlands. And I wound up on the trip going across Europe just as a matter of routine, really getting a doctor in Europe somewhere to see me. I wound up doing that in the first place I spent time in, which was Holland, in Amsterdam. And I wound up seeing a doctor who I did not know in advance. I swear to you, I did not know in advance that the doctor I was going to see was in the middle of this whole medical cannabis program thing that they were setting up in Holland.
What year was that?
I wound up getting that was 1996.
Wow.
Whew, man.
Yeah.
It was almost like it was meant to be. And I was telling Michael, I was telling George when we first met, was working together on the think tank group Veterans Action Council. And I was just very impressed with everything that you've been working on, especially on the legislative side. And I think it would be really interesting for everyone to hear about what you did in the UN and with the World Health Organization to have cannabis removed from the 1961 UN treaty.
So cannabis is still in the treaty. And the reason why we couldn't get it out of the treaty, even though the World Health Organization actually recommended that it didn't fit, you know, with the other drugs that it was in the treaty with, they said that it was their mandate, as they understood it, to make scheduling changes and rescheduling, you know, recommendations. And the treaty itself in 1961, it was written in such a way as to be the standards of illegal drugs or the standards of dangerous drugs were coca, cannabis, and poppy. So they literally wrote the treaty around those three substances, which means if you have some substance that you want to put into the treaty, you compare it to those three. Is it like poppy? Is it like coca? Is it like cannabis? And if it is, then so to pull cannabis out of the treaty is going to require an actual heavy duty rewrite of the treaty. But what they did do was, in so much as they were able to, remove it from the dangerous drugs list, the way that it was scheduled before, where it was scheduled the same as heroin. And now it's just scheduled just like any other drug. Essentially, there's nothing special about its scheduling. And that, together with guidance that the World Health Organization has given, supporting medical use of cannabis, really wholeheartedly supporting it, saying that it was tolerable, that the side effects were not worse. In fact, they were very good compared to other drugs. And more importantly, I think they said that it helped patients suffering from problems that they had no other medication available to treat. That's, coming from the World Health Organization, I think that's pretty heavy duty acknowledgement. So that's a complete reversal of where the World Health Organization was in 1950. That was, believe it or not, the last guidance in the system was from 1950.
Jeez,
that's crazy.
It's like so antique. Yeah, everything's so antique. So what happened was kind of, I can get in any part of the story you want more detail. And I think the parts in Geneva, Switzerland are fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into that.
To give you sort of the nutshell of the whole timeline, around 2009, Japan and Azerbaijan went before the United Nations in Vienna, Austria, and put forth a resolution to try to tighten control on cannabis to make it even apply to cannabis seeds. And a little side note here is that cannabis seeds are well known and even specifically written as an example of hemp, which is exempt in the treaty. Hemp is exempt from control, written as such in the treaty. And seed, stalks, and stems, fiber and stems are the examples, quite obviously given as examples of hemp and exempt in the treaty. So for Japan and Azerbaijan, and essentially the United Nations, to ask the World Health Organization to look into this, whether we can put seeds under control, I think it was a much heavier lift than they ever imagined that they were asking for. It took like 5 years for that to convert into a process, which we worked a lot behind the scenes on, but 5 long years before we ever even got a process started in Geneva, back in the World Health Organization. There, we had to fight several fights to get the World Health Organization to really take this seriously, to really understand their own history, which we now understand so clearly that cannabis was never scientifically reviewed before putting into treaty control. The World Health Organization previously said that there was a scientific evaluation in 1935. They were mistaken. That evaluation in 1935 was not done by the World Health Organization's predecessor, the Medical Committee of the League of Nations. It wasn't. We went to the library, we proved it. And also that the cannabis, in the treaty was something that they were reluctant to actually do a review. They were looking at it like, oh, let's do an update. We'll just have everybody give input and we'll produce a paper, and then over time that paper maybe will lead to some further outcome. And in charge of that paper was this drug warrior named Bertha Madras, Professor Madras, professor of neuropsychiatry, Harvard. Talking about credentials of a drug warrior to have to go up against in a debate. We had to show the World Health Organization her sort of conflicts of interest. We brought up her work in the United States opposing rescheduling in the U.S. and all, and they actually removed her from the expert committee at the World Health Organization. We had to work with the leadership of the World Health Organization to get them to actually do the review. At one point they were stalled and didn't look like they were going to do it. So it just, and we had a side saga of our own activists in Geneva. We actually have a very well-developed way of getting into the UN. We have badges and everything, a well-developed system of what's called non-governmental organizations, NGO participation in UN meetings, very organized and easy to navigate. None of that applies basically in Geneva. Geneva has a tiny number of organizations that are accredited with the World Health Organization and that have badges. It's very, very difficult to get into their World Health Assemblies and stuff like that. And our activists, especially Farid from France and Kenzie Ribilet from Barcelona, were ritually harassed by the security. And I'm serious, man. Like hardcore harassed by security in Geneva before we finally resolved a relationship, you might say, with the Geneva authorities, and now we seem to work quite smoothly with them. So,
do you find that now versus then things are a bit easier? The process may be a little bit more open. The people behind the process may be a little bit more open. Just now with the time in cannabis and the way things are moving and kind of normalizing, do you find it to be even maybe just a little bit easier?
I think that had we not interacted, and when I say we, our little team, like I said, Kenzie in Barcelona and Farid in France and Amy in Mexico and Myrtle in South Africa and the Eric and Gabby in Austria and on and on and on. We sort of pulled the best of the cannabis movement and put them into a team and have worked at the international level.
Right.
And without our input, without us bringing in the voice of the patient, the cannabis industry, just what we know of the science, the scientists, I have a feeling that this entire process would have just produced a supportive UN position for like Marinol and Sativex. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have really recognized what we call traditional use of medicine. It wouldn't have recognized the complementary use, which is like what we were using in the States and US and elsewhere. It wouldn't have recognized a lot of our world experience. Frankly, it doesn't come on the radar of the World Health Organization. We had to bring it to them. We had to formulate it in a sort of a package and put it in front of them. And their recommendations back to the United Nations were really, really good. They were argued with by some of our contemporaries over there in Vienna that they didn't go far enough, that they acted too politically, but they wrote recommendations that could actually pass. And in fact, the one big, bold recommendation of removing cannabis from Schedule 4 in the treaty, the thing that I'm saying is equivalent to removing cannabis from the most dangerous drugs list, that was a very bold step and one that very much needed to be done and actually got done. On the 2nd of December, the United Nations Drug Committee there, it's called the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, 53 countries that are given the task of voting on such things, voted unanimous, not unanimously, but a high enough majority to pass that into international law. And right now, we're in the process of that being sort of the ink drying. I mean, quite literally, it takes a certain amount of months before that process is through, any appeals that might come up or whatever. And then each country, including our executive branch, President Biden, will receive documentation from the UN saying that the world drug law, United Nations drug control system, international treaties on narcotics have been changed. And now the new international law is this. And, it's going to be interesting to see. President Biden was already talking about rescheduling. So this hopefully will really help him and have, maybe more options on the table or something like that. But I want to say a couple of things about the World Health Organization. They were brilliant in the way they presented this to the UN. I mean, they dropped it late, which automatically almost created a whole year of delay because it's an annual process, these big meetings in Vienna. And that actually created this huge window of opportunity to discuss these recommendations in detail. And they had no less than 4 international cannabis drug summits, just the entire day at the UN dedicated to cannabis. In the timeline of our history, that's unprecedented.
Well, and that's where
extremely cool.
No, and that's where I think, not to discredit you, and I hope that wasn't how that was received. It's actually to credit you and your team and the people that have been a part of that movement from such an early on stage, because that is the reason why things are the way that they are now. And once again, I not to discredit, but more so to credit the fact that what you have done is now easier to get things done because of what you've done. And, because of normalizing cannabis as much as you have been obviously a huge factor in the movement. I mean, you can just tell just the passion and where you're at and the you know, for somebody like yourself to have that deep of a passion to normalize something and to do what you've done. My question is it's kind of intriguing to me is you go through this time span of having the dedication to this. Is it easier now when you're sitting in a room full of people to talk about cannabis and changing the positions that it's in than it was, 20, 30 years ago?
Not really. It's funny. I did this interview with a fellow that followed us around at the Emerald Cup for a while with Aaron Augustus with the Veterans Cannabis Group. And this fellow was doing his documentary points for his thesis. And he asked me a whole bunch of questions. And my last comments on one of his questions wound up being the title of his film, which was I was answering a question about, kind of legalization. And I told him that we all thought legalization was going to be like, okay, we legalized it. Now we're done. We go sit on the porch, we sit on a rocking chair.
No.
Seriously, I mean, if you look back in the marijuana movement, starting at its beginnings, in the 50s and 60s, all the way to now, for the vast majority of its existence, it talks about legalization in a very nebulous sort of end of the golden brick road, kind of terms. And in many ways, it's just the beginning of the road. Now that wound up being the title of his thesis video is Cannabis Legalization, the Beginning of the Road.
That's when that's when you found out that when you pulled the curtain back, the wizard really wasn't what we thought it was.
Yeah, there's no wizard. Yeah. So at the international level, all right. First of all, some of the stuff that's going on, like with legalization, looks different from the international perspective than it does from our movement perspective, and not just a USA or Canada or whatever, but just movement perspective versus the real world perspective here. And the real world perspective is that these countries like Uruguay, Mexico, Canada, United States, number one, all four sound different at the UN about what they say. There's little similarities, especially pretty good similarities between Canada and Uruguay. But for the most part, USA isn't even in that conversation. We're out of it. We haven't legalized yet. We're doing some experiments in the States that should be overlooked and not even, seen, which is for the USA to say that. I mean, you got to imagine if that was any other country on earth, and that was 20 years ago, it would have been the USA that would have been breathing down their neck. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
About doing what we're doing right now. So, but anyway, that's where we're at, is that this legalization, as we see it from the movement, looks a lot different. It looks more like human rights. It looks more like different approaches to drug control, to remove the traffickers' profits. It looks like satisfaction of national court battles. You know what I'm saying? It's got all these different looks at the international level. It doesn't look like what we like it to look like, which is that, yeah, cannabis is been basically, just, I don't even know a strong enough word for how badly it's been, mischaracterized over the last 100 years.
Right.
And the folks around it, trafficking it, growing it, using it, have been, just villainized for no reason. And it's time to correct that and actually correct history.
I think there's so many different layers to what's happening, and you're the person that has more intimate involvement in all those layers, not only, just in the United States, but obviously worldwide. And what we typically see and how we react is more so on kind of, it's almost like it's singular in the way of it's just legalization. And what does that mean? You know what I mean? Most people, like you just said, it's just, legalize marijuana and that's it. But there's so many other layers that you guys are peeling back and dealing with that have been created, whether you want to call it, misconduct in some ways and maybe some oversight, but regardless, they have to be dealt with because they've been put into this in a way that it's so difficult to get to where we just generally say legalization. What does that mean? Everybody has a different way of looking at it and understanding it, but the people like yourself really understand it, because you can't just one day wake up and go, oh, we're legalizing this. And that's where it gets confusing for everybody else, because they go, oh, fuck, we got our states, or, we got X amount of states that are legal, and we've got this and that, but it's no longer, it's now the federal side of it is such a big demand to get past. And we all look at it and go, well, what do you mean? I can sit here and I can buy and sell and smoke and whatever else. It is legal. It's not. I hate to say it, but everybody, as you're sitting there and we're sitting here, we could all be fucking rolled up and arrested tomorrow because it's not legal. And that's, what I'm doing today isn't doing anything to make it legal. I'd like to profess that I am, but I'm not. I'm a manufacturer. We are, and a cultivator, and that's our process here. We're reaping the benefits of what you guys are doing in the trenches, to get it to this level. And I've always said, no matter how you look at it, listen, my parents were hippies, and if that offends people, I'm sorry, but that's just the truth. And everybody takes part in this. And if I take this in understanding, back in the day, the hippies, they just wanted to be able to legalize, to be able to carry it, smoke it on your front porch, enjoy life, and understand that it wasn't a bad thing. That's the hippie era, bringing cannabis to legalization. And you know what? It happened. You cannot discredit, or however you want to look at it, they have done that to a T. And then what they didn't understand was it was going to become commercialized. And that was not part of what anybody truly, really wanted out of that era. But listen, you can sit on your porch and get high, and you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get arrested as everybody used to. So as this was going along, my parents were involved in a lot of stuff as well. And you're in the depth behind all of that, doing such a dark, I don't want to say dark, but you're in the darker, deeper areas of legalization, not just here, but in the world. And so the hippies, we all bring this forward. You're still you're the unknown in the background. And then we get to the point where, now we go to commercialization, and we're still not legal. You're still back there fighting and doing everything unknown in a lot of ways, and getting it legal, trying to get it legal through the federal side. We're now up front, dancing around like look at what we've done, and we haven't done shit. Let's be honest. Yep. And I'd love to be able to say that I've taken part in this. I haven't. You know what? I've owned stores, and I've manufacturing, and my part is that we're in the process of normalizing it as it stands on a day to day, and allowing people to have free access without that the problems that we've previously had. But once again, you're still, as we're sitting here, you're still, after all these years, in the trenches, in the background, and not that if you're asking for credit, you would never be where you're at. You're not, I don't feel like you're the guy that's standing there going, hey, everybody, look at me and look at what I've done. But I think it needs to be known that this is what you guys are doing behind the scenes. You know what I mean? Like this stuff doesn't happen without somebody behind the scenes working the cameras. And that's just how the truth of it. Yep. And we get to sit up here and we can't even look good. We just got to fucking sit here. You know what I mean? But the people behind the scenes, they're the ones that make it work.
There's a disconnect, and the question that you ask, basically implicitly is a really, really important question. What do we need to do to make what you're doing right now legal, to connect that? And I think really right now what we just did at the international level was very clearly to legalize medical cannabis. So we just sort of did the universal or the international Prop 215. That's kind of where we are right now. Like internationally, we just opened the door to countries instead of counties in California.
Right.
We opened it up to countries in the world to do their own thing and to participate.
Wow. That's a really good way of putting it too.
You know, up until now, you've had Canada, you've had the Netherlands, you've had Colombia's tried to get into it a little bit, Uruguay's tried to get into it a little bit. This cannabis market for research and for medical patients under strict pharmacy access. And right now, the United Nations Drug Control Program, a little committee called the International Narcotics Control Board, 13
little committee.
These guys are right now, literally as we're sitting here right now, they're working on guidance for countries on how to regulate medical cannabis internationally, on how to fill out the forms, how to, best practices in manufacturing and carrying the cannabis around and distribution. And this is the thing, okay? Right now, we've got several conversations going on at once, and they need to all connect and align for what you're doing to line up with that and have your stuff be legal in California and in the USA and be able to sell it in like the Czech Republic in a dispensary, and to do that, it's going to require the executive branch and Congress to work together. And right now, they're just beginning that process, and it's a little helter-skelter. Veterans Action Council is trying to get involved basically in this multiple layer of conversation, some of it going on in the Senate, some of it going on in the House, some of it going on right there in the executive branch, and then some of it going on in our movement in a couple of places. So all those conversations essentially need to align for us to do this correctly, just to take advantage of what we've got now. To do what we're going to do next, which is to regulate adult access to cannabis nationally and then link that up internationally, that's a whole nother ball of wax. That's much more difficult. When you were saying before, is this hard as an activist? That's where I get into my levels of difficulty. And as a cannabis activist is when you start talking about world marijuana policy and how do we approach this treaty that needs to be rewritten. It can take as much as 10 years to rewrite a treaty, to do a new treaty. That's a big commitment of time by a lot of countries that we don't even have that. We've got a nice handful of countries, Jamaica, Switzerland, Uruguay, Mexico, Canada, the United States. These are all countries I'm mentioning that have been extremely helpful to us in Vienna, including, as I said, USA. I mean, check that out. In the last year or so, USA has been helping us in Vienna. So this is a new world for us, and we're starting to work together in ways that we never have before. If President Biden can go to like Schedule 3 or Schedule 4 or Schedule 5 instead of Schedule 2 in his rescheduling, that is where it's going to start mattering. But then it's going to have to do with FDA and the National Institutes of Health and how they approach product safety. Do they put you in with health and food supplements? Do they put you in with natural and herbal medicines, or do they make you climb the ladder for double-blind placebo-based tests for full FDA approval for prescription medicine? That's going to be in the end kind of negotiation that we haven't even started yet as a movement. And I can tell you, we're in there as veterans working on this and leading this all these years. We've been in the background, but the background we've been hanging out with people like our head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the head of our International Narcotics and Law Enforcement branch of our State Department. So the people we've been hanging out with are kind of cool.
So what drives you? I mean, I know it's cannabis, but is it the fact that there's so much meaning behind it and it becomes a task, or
I was driven by just some simple visions that I've had over the years, and it's amazing to boil down 10 and 20 years of work to just a simple vision. But I had a vision before I started this international work that we as a cannabis movement were all around. I sort of pictured this, us kind of around the president as the president was getting ready to sign some massive bill into law, and somebody said something about the treaty, and everybody around the table just stopped like deer in headlights and didn't know what to say. And I thought, my God, we've got to prevent this from happening. And it's really quite a simple task, in the end, to get the cannabis movement to really pay attention to the treaties and be ready for that eventuality. And this is what happened, all right? I worked for like 10 years to create sort of a landscape of reform tools, what you might call our toolkit at the international level. Got our badges, helped reinvigorate committees that had been long since not used anymore at the UN, just so that one day when we were ready to legalize cannabis, we could walk in and take over and use this stuff. And to my dismay, and this is why I bring it up, cannabis movement did not take advantage of those tools. The SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, the Harm Reduction Coalition, Law Enforcement Action Partnership, on and on, DRC Net Foundation, all these groups I'm naming are groups that I also worked with at this level that just took the ball and ran with it. But like the Marijuana Policy Project, Americans for Safe Access, National Organization for Reform Marijuana Laws, et cetera, just never really picked it up. The NCOD, this group out of Europe, the European NGO Coordinating Network that really stands as one of the standalone big NGOs coordinating marijuana and cannabis industry in Europe. They've been helping us in Vienna and really picking up the ball and carrying a lot of the ball. And this group out of South Africa, Fields of Green for All, out of South Africa, is having to pick up the ball for, kind of at the world level and carry the ball at the UN for lack of vacuum of leadership. And the Cannabis Industry Association, all these guys are read in because I've been reading them in at the highest levels for years, and they all know what's going on, and they've chosen really not to put resources there in Vienna or even in New York. When we have World Drug Summits, they're in New York. The day-to-day stuff year to year is in Vienna, Austria, and they've just chosen not to be there, not to take advantage of it. So now, as we've gotten into cannabis and we've gotten running with the ball, in that vacuum, we've just worked with who we can. Americans for Safe Access, I will say, stepped up pretty good and helped us in Geneva.
That's good to hear.
Especially early on, like 5 years ago. Yeah. Steph sat right next to me testifying at the expert committee, really, really good input that they've done. They've helped us create this thing called the International Medical Cannabis Patient Coalition. But frankly, it hasn't really acted much as a coalition, more as sort of an ASA project over the last years or so. So, but that has membership potentially from like 25 or 26 different countries. Anyway, there's just sort of this vacuum at the international level, and we've tried to fill it. We've worked a lot with IACM, the International Association for Cannabinoid Medicine. That's a medical cannabis research and doctor group that includes such people like Dr. Meshulam and Dr. Abrams, et cetera. And then we also work with the Society for Cannabis Clinicians out of California. And both of those groups were very pivotal in some of the work that we just did over the last 6 months in Vienna. And then also MAPS, which is another group that I helped get accreditation, and they really ran with the ball, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And they've been very adamant, and worked in Vienna, done side events and stuff on the right to science, which nobody has been talking about. They talk in Vienna so much about drug control, they forget, about human rights and all these other things that actually are higher, more important things for them in their own system, in their own hierarchy of their own requirements of their own system. So anyway, that's kind of the lay of the land, of activism at that level.
No, that's incredible. So, Michael, we kind of talked on it a little bit about with the new administration coming in, and what do you think will happen here, let's just say the next 2 years with this, the Congress we have in session and with the executive branch? Like, what policies or reforms do we think we'll start seeing?
I think that, in the executive branch, it's pretty clear. Like I said, just so you know, understand this a little bit better, in 1971, we passed our Controlled Substances Act, our federal law. And that U.S. federal law replaced the Marijuana Tax Act, the old defunct Marijuana Tax Act that was based on old Harry Anslinger's stuff from the 1930s. That was found unconstitutional and was replaced by this new law. The new law basically enshrined and implemented the 1961 treaty that we had passed into law 10 years earlier. We went through the entire 2/3 ratification and everything and ratified that treaty in 61. It sat there, and then 71, when they created this new marijuana law, new federal drug law in the U.S., they picked up that treaty and wrote it into our law. And what that means here, there's a paragraph in it where it says that should there be any changes to the drug schedules in the treaty that, were as in effect as of this 1971 law, that our Attorney General shall make a determination based on that scheduling at the treaty level as to what we need to do at our U.S. federal law to comply. And that will be done with no consideration for the previous section. And that previous section was the whole thing about accepted medical use and, the place where we've been mired as a cannabis movement for like 50 years in trying to reschedule and fighting with the DEA is that previous section. That's just completely like out of the picture when you start talking about the treaty. And that's the way our law is written right now. So that gives the U.S. executive branch, President Biden, incredible authority, given this change in treaty, to do something rather bold in executive powers to reschedule cannabis. Like I said, maybe, I'm sure he's thinking Schedule 2, and I'm sure the DEA is going to fight hard to change it to Schedule 2. Yeah. But easily we can, number one, Schedule 2 was already an option. The previous Attorney General recommendation, based on our previous treaty as it was written before, was already 1 or 2. We could have always had Schedule 2 if the DEA wanted to not, play with us so much. We could have had Schedule 2 a long time ago. Some people in our movement feel that Schedule 2 would have been worse for us. Maybe it was better that we never got Schedule 2. But with this change in treaty, we should certainly be able to skip Schedule 2, go to 3, 4, or 5. And that is just on the executive branch side, without any change from Congress, without any interaction from Congress, already with the law as it's written in our U.S. federal law. Then you have Congress. And everybody's looking at the MORE Act with good reason. MORE Act passed the House. It was a historic passage, first time ever marijuana progressive descheduling bill passed the House of Congress. So it is certainly historic, but that doesn't necessarily equate to that bill making it out of the soup kitchen. It looks like with the Democratic control of the Senate, we now have the ability to force hearings and make things happen process-wise. But as far as making a bill like that pass, that's a little bit higher, bigger lift. There may actually be some Democrats that would vote against it and some Republicans that would vote for it. You'd have to do sort of a head count. And I would imagine there's going to be some negotiation where you're going to need to get, sort of conservative, middle-of-the-road people to sign on. And there's a lot of stuff about the MORE Act that was not, middle-of-the-road conservative stuff. It's going to have to be a pretty big, I would expect, a pretty big process of negotiation before we get to what's actually going to come out of the Congress in a couple of years. But it certainly seems reasonable something would come out of the Congress in a couple of years. And it certainly seems reasonable it would deschedule cannabis. That, in light of this conversation with the treaty, is very interesting because, like the MORE Act, it doesn't say anything about treaty. And that's okay. I did the research. I looked into the law, and the MORE Act could deschedule cannabis, which is essentially violating the treaty or whatever. It can do that. There's case law and stuff that I've been shown by the attorneys have shown me that makes it very clear that the Congress can pass a law and the president can sign it into law that actually violates our treaty position. But then, as someone in the industry, you really want to know, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this internationally? We are not disconnected from the world when it comes to, anything, really. It's a very global economy, a global world. And our position on drugs has been sort of a controlling function in the international scene. So I think that we need to really, as a movement, we need to sort of figure out how we want to handle this, what we would like the United States to do. I can tell you, in a perfect world, the United States would go to Vienna and would present a package of legalization, would present a rewrite of the treaty, whatever it is, that we would need to do to make the treaty in line with what we want to do, which we know is in line with evidence and truth and based in fact and historical correction, equity, and stuff like that.
Told you knew a lot.
Shit, we haven't even This is merely a scratch.
Yeah, exactly. We need like part 2, 3, and 4 with Michael, I think, to get through all this.
It'd be great to have you here.
Yeah, no, definitely, Michael. When we kind of get away from this whole COVID machine, we got to get you out here, and we'll hook you up with some Hellman Valley product, but also want to get you on here live. I think it just could be a great conversation piece with everyone.
Absolutely. Hey.
We got a little drive-by.
If you didn't catch what
I said, please take him.
Oh, hey, no problem.
The timing was perfect. Hey, we'd like to get you out here. Boom, take him.
Take him, he's yours.
Wow.
He's been in the house way too long.
he's been here too long, been cooped up too long.
Oh, good stuff.
Wow. Well, listen, much appreciated. Once again, I mean, we could go on for hours.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's so much depth to this. I think it's important to thank people like yourself, your team. I'm going to assume that was your wife behind you for putting up with your shit. And I know we don't ever thank them enough, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's like there's so much going on behind the scenes, and don't get me wrong. I mean, there's people in the front of it as well that are, I mean, you got to have the clowns getting out of the car, and that's, some of us, that's what we're doing. We're the ones in the car. But honestly, behind the scenes, there's so much more going on that we don't know about. And I think it's like, this is a start for sure. And I'm excited, and I'd love to have, as we're going through these conversations that kind of update of where things are, because I think it's important for people to understand. Now, we've got a pretty good base of people that watch and listen to what we do. And I think in all fairness, it's right up our alley for people to get the education of where all this is coming from. And, we've got a long ways to go. And I think, to kind of summarize, this is a guy, this Michael Krawitz, that is really selfless in a lot of ways. And I'm not big on art in some ways, but, I was down in Spain, and there's a church down there, and I'm sure you know what church it is. I don't remember the name. I apologize. But it's been being worked on, for 100-something years. And you got to think the guys that started it, and as they're working along with this, it's like they know that they'll never see the finish of this in their lifetime, but yet they still bust their ass and they work the best that they can to understand that the next person that's going to come along and pick up the chisel is going to do the same thing. And that's that training. And it's selfless because, once again, I mean, us all sitting here at the table, we're always in hopes, but there's so much more to this that has to carry on through our lifetimes to really make this fluid. And it's definitely you and the teams behind what you're doing that are making that happen at that level. I guess it's like, if I were to summarize, I guess it's like a foundation. We're like the new era where houses are built out of straw, but you have a great foundation, and that's where it has to start. And so with that, I mean, I can't thank you enough, first of all, for serving the country and allowing us to sit at a table like this and do what we do. And, and Bryan as well being a huge part of that, but more so not getting mad at the country and really standing up and helping to, in that way, make it a much better and safer and easier place to be. I mean, we are the United States, but we're not the world. And to have someone like yourself doing the things that you're doing, not just for the United States, but for the world, that's fucking huge.
Yeah.
So for that, I thank you. Immensely.
It's funny. There's all these different places that you can go and be and stand and do stuff as an activist. And for example, I got started, as I said, in the university. When I was retraining. It was a little student chapter of Normal at Virginia Tech, and I went to a city council meeting, a town council of Blacksburg, Virginia, and until I went to that council meeting, I thought our meetings were small at our chapter and there were actually more young people at our chapter meeting at the university than there were attendees at the city council meeting downtown in Blacksburg. And I just use that as an example because I think the cannabis movement, we kind of tend to follow a little bit of herd mentality, sheep, whatever herd mentality. And you go to a major hemp event, you could be 250,000 people there. You go to the town council and that Friday and there's 8 people there, and, at the federal level, there seems to be a competition and very difficult to even get into the room where everybody's talking about cannabis and stuff at the national level. But then you go to the international level and then the room's empty again.
Right.
And I, for one, honestly, I'd love to see some of the people, take some of that enthusiasm at the federal level and apply it at the international level and leave a little bit more room and openness in the tent at the federal level and have, be greeted with open arms by the same people that they're letting in the federal level at the international level.
Right.
Hint, hint. But anyway, the thing is that I've attended so many meetings at the Office of National Drug Control Policy, for example, as we prepare for these Vienna meetings on drug control, where 98% of the people in the room were all leaders of high-intensity drug trafficking area grant programs, community anti-drug programs, et cetera. And then, here I am for the cannabis movement.
That's good.
Yeah, that's
good
great.
Shit. Well, this is not the last one. That's
absolutely
for sure.
not. No, not with this guy.
I do have to thank you again. Really appreciate it. I hope we just continue to have you doing what you do, and that we can get some updates. And Bryan's pretty thorough on making sure that we're staying on the front of that as well. So listen. Good.
We should have a good update, in the coming months, as soon as that documentation works its way through from the UN and hits the U.S. Capitol, executive branch. We have that conversation, which we're already talking to them. We're already talking to the executive branch, preparing for this. So hopefully, at least that conversation, we'll be able to have a bird's eye view, and I'm happy to share it. I think it'd be fun.
Sounds
Absolutely.
like another podcast.
Yeah. Shit, we got another one coming up. So that'll be 2 this year.
Yeah, we'll book that one with them.
All right, Michael. Well, listen, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And everybody, listen, like and subscribe. Once I said, it's free. Like, this is free shit. You don't have to pay for it. All you got to do is use your finger to like and subscribe. You're going to get a ton of information. This was definitely one of those times you're going to listen and you're going to watch. Not much to see on this end other than...
Yeah, Michael, you're kind of doing like the Max Headroom, kind of coming in and out, little pausing, but hey, tons honestly, of great information.
I'd rather have that be on our end, so there is no clarity on the two of us.
Yeah.
But anyways, thank you again so much. Appreciate it, and we'll be talking soon.
Thank you, sir.
All right, PV Unfiltered. Peace.